I remember I ended my last part three, The Triumph of Modern Science, explaining how modern science has gotten into trouble through postmodern skepticism and through science being seen as Western and as a privileged view of the world taught by white racists. And of course, that's not the only reason that science has gotten in trouble. There seems to be some truth with this notion about science being a result of privilege and power, as we've seen in, for example, in the COVID epidemic, when it seems that maybe money or people are just confused. What is scientific? Science is getting in trouble. So this last section, part four, is about the importance of returning to the Bible to save, not only to save, and I'm going to show you how we can actually advance science by returning to the Bible. The I'm going to speak about five schools of evangelical science. Christians don't all teach science the same way, and the five schools I'm going to mention are mainstream science that's taught by some Christian evangelical organizations such as BioLogos, which was founded by the Francis Collins, who engineered the first genome. What the genes of the body are concerned, and then there's prominent evangelical scholars, or some of us may call them liberal, that want to follow the mainstream scientific teachings about evolution. One of them being N.T. Wright, Tom Wright, the famous British scholar of the Bible, and John Walton at Wheaton University, which used to be, and others, which used to be a bastion of evangelical Christianity, or even fundamentalist Christianity at one time. The other view is an older evangelical view that's kind of going out of favor now, but it's called the ruin and restoration view, that there was an initial creation at the first verse of Genesis, and the earth became formless with the rebellion of the angels, and God recreated things. So it recognizes an ancient world and a recent recreation, but an ancient world is part of that view. The Scofield Reference Bible taught this, and that influenced most fundamentalists, or many fundamentalists, in the early 20th century. And my friend Richard Land, who was the head for a long time, head of the Southern Baptist Religious and Ethics Council, and he's now still senior editor of the Christian Post, maybe the leading evangelical newspaper, replacing Christianity Today. Richard Land told me that he accepts this ruin restoration old earth view, but it's falling out of prominence now. Another old earth day age creation view being taught by Hugh Ross, who I also know, and others have supported. In fact, the age view, I also subscribe to this. But I don't teach the same way that Hugh Ross does. But that's a second view of creation being taught by evangelical Christians. In the latter part of the 20th century, what's called young earth creation views came to through homeschools came to predominate among evangelical Christians, and especially with the publication of the book The Genesis Flood by John Whitcomb and Henry Morris, and they established an organization called IC Institution for Creation Research. And another view, another organization, the most prominent one teaching this, is headed by my friend Ken Helm. It's the Answers in Genesis in Cincinnati, and they've got the Ark Encounter in Williamson, Kentucky, and then there's the Australian organization, Creation Ministries International, and then there was another gentleman named Ken Hovind that helped populate this younger creation view in the early years. But so I would say probably this has become the predominant view among evangelicals, teaching the creation in 24-hour days, and having trouble with what my friend Ken Helm refers to as millions of years. And when you're reading the things in a certain way, that does give a problem. But it has been the only view of the Bible that has given an explanation of a worldwide flood up until yours truly, a view of Scripture science. Now, I don't have an organization behind Scripture science, so you don't hear a lot of it. You mainly hear me connected with the Ararat discovery over in Turkey. But I did manage to get one disciple, and now he has passed. But this is my dear friend, Dr. Norman Geisler, who never endorsed any of these other views, even though his reference book teaches all these views, and he would never endorse them, but he did endorse my teachings about origins and about the flood, in his own words, with his name and scholarship. Now, just to give describe the differences, there's the questions of the antiquity of man. How long has man been around? How long has the earth been around? And the flood, did it exist, or so? How big was it? The mainstream science, they don't recognize a flood at all, and of course, the earth is old, and man is a product of evolution. The older ruin and restoration view believed in the old earth in Genesis 1, but they believe that man is only 6,000 years old. And they were, the Christians in the early 20th century, they were divided because at that time it seemed to be possible that man had not spread outside the ancient Near East at the time of the flood. So the flood may have been local. That's becoming hard to defend later in the 20th century. But the organization, Hugh Ross and Reasons to Believe, teach a local flood, but it follows mainstream science and teaching that man is ancient. It just doesn't teach it in an evolutionary view. The young Earth creations. By the way, you'll notice as he's moved from left to right, they're getting more conservative. And of course, the younger creationists have probably the most reason why it's been the most popular. It's the most biblical. It gives a higher authority to the Bible than any of these other views that I've mentioned so far. It teaches a young Earth, the worldwide flood, and man is 6,000 years old. Now, my own view is it differs from young Earth creation. Is I see the Earth itself as being older than that, and I don't see the Bible as actually. In fact, it does not literally teach 24-hour creation days. We read those in there, and younger creationists justify their reading. But as I'm going to explain, my Scripture science is more literal than younger creationist science. When you literally take what the Bible actually reads. Now, the one way to decide how do these interpret it? basically the mainstream science views that science is truth and Scripture is allegory. Is Biologos, they teach this as teaching lessons, kind of the old liberal view of the Bible. The old Bible ruin and restoration view, well, Bible and science, they teach different things, but they harmonize. Hugh Ross, the way I understand it, and just based on some of our personal conversation, his authority is science, but he interprets Scripture. He believes in the infallibility of Scripture, but he interprets Scripture based on science. Young Earth creationists, they have a problem with that. I do too. And Young Earth creationists believe that Scripture, and because they believe that Scripture is teaching 24-hour creation days, their creation days interpret Scripture. It interprets science. It interprets science. It won't even consider it in any other way. But I'm seeing it interpreting Scripture rather than using Scripture, and like the difference is, and my Scripture science is Christ interprets Scripture, and Scripture in turn interprets science. So we'll have to go into a little bit more, and you'll see how more biblical this view is. Well, one of the things is how you can compare these views. The mainstream scientific view, Biologos, you asked them about the Ark on Mount Ararat, they said that's just nonsense because there's no evidence of the flood. My friend Hugh Ross said, well, it's impossible because the flood was local. Mount Ararat is too high for that. He doesn't believe that could possibly be Noah's Ark. Now, Young Earth creationists, you would think they believe in a worldwide flood, and they would just really be enthused about the ark being on Mount Ararat. But the problem is Mount Ararat sits on their flood evidence. The mountain itself sits on it. So they said the mountain could not have been there at the time of Noah. So they think it's very unlikely that the ark could be on Mount Ararat, which, and in my case, I actually trace migrations to this mountain, and I see they're matching up, and I'm almost certain that I have actually visited the Ark of Noah. But now let's go to something else that's very important, and that's the antiquity of man, or the date of Adam. Christians, we believe that our sin came from Adam, the fall of Adam, and if Adam has to exist, but somehow some of the ones that are teaching the evangelicals, they claim to be evangelicals, but they doubt whether there was a historical Adam. To one person, they want to see Adam as just simply man, and that becomes very difficult to fit in with the understanding of Scripture. The Hugh Ross, he accepts the fact that man is as old as science says it is, 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. What really troubles me about some of the teachings of his organization, especially Fozzie Rana, one of the other teachers there, that the teaches that Neanderthals were a creature that were partly man, had part features of man and part animal, or hominoids. I could more easily accept evolution than I could accept that view. I don't understand why they teach it, why they teach such a thing. Neanderthals were clearly modern humans, and even scientists are more. They're teaching that now, but they're preserving the old teaching about Neanderthals not being true human beings. I just don't understand that. That's all I'll say about that. The Young Earth creationists, of course, they teach the biblical view. Man is about 6,000 years old. And not only do my latest book, Ancient Science, actually defends this teaching. Of course, I haven't actually made the precise measurements, but I'm pretty sure the case. I'm explaining how scientists got misled into thinking that man is 200 the 300,000 years ago. I explained exactly how that happened, and basically it's deconstructed this whole notion of the antiquity of man, which is it's almost as radical as showing that the flood itself was historical. Uh, and then, of course, with regard to evolution, the biologos and followers the mainstream science view, they teach evolution. All the other schools, included reasons to believe of Hugh is we all reject evolution. We all believe in adaptation of species of animals, or what's sometimes called microevolution, but we don't believe that this is species we believe were independently created by God, and that's becoming easy to. In fact, I believed in evolution until I studied. It wasn't so much the Bible that caused me to reject evolution. It's when I actually began to study evolution, and I realized that I had been taught based on everything that everybody agrees are false premises. And it really made me upset when I realized I had been taught things that even the people teaching it knew weren't true. Now, as far as the antiquity of the world, the current scientific view, the cosmos itself is about 13.7 billion years old. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Hugh Ross and reason to believe also accept the same period of time. The younger creationists, they of course teach that Earth was created in 6 24-hour days, and the entire universe is only about 6,000 years old. Now, my view is that the cosmos and the Earth were about the same age, so I'm differing from mainstream science, and they are of an indeterminate antiquity. I'm not going to put a time period on this because I'm not sure, and I don't have that much trust in the dating, in the scientific dating. I know it's very old, but how old I do not know. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, of course, is the origin of everything, the origin of the cosmos. Mainstream science teaches Big Bang. And by the way, this is really big, and it's evidence that was confirming the biblical view of creationists. When I first heard about it, I rejoiced, as did many people. And of course, Hugh Ross and RTP, Reason to Believe, teach that as well. But it of course bothers the younger creationists who don't want to believe that the Earth is billions of years, and they don't want to believe that way. They don't want to believe that anything existed more than about 6,000 years ago. So they lose this scientific evidence of creation in doing so. Now, I don't teach it in the same way as the Big Bang. I'm actually teaching the creation of the Earth as the separation of waters, which is really like exactly how the Bible teaches it. And I'm showing the scientific evidence that that's actually how things occur. And now we go to the days of creation. Of course, mainstream science don't believe in divine creation, so they have no separate creation days. Hugh Ross, like as I do, he sees these as the Creator's days, which when you read the scripture, it appears to be the Creator's day. But the younger creationists, as I mentioned, they follow Newton's teaching that what you see described in Genesis is how the creation would be seen by man. And of course, the sun was given for man's time, and so they project this Newtonian time period, a 24-hour period, into the entire creation days. But I see these as the days of they're not defined by the clock. God is not on the clock. God was not on the clock. They were distinct days, morning, evening, and morning. So there was a beginning and the end, and that was specifically used in the language of Genesis because they were not ordinary days. When it comes to the earth itself, the geologies to see, I mentioned the progressive creationists who discovered that the earth was actually historical, and the things that are lower, generally speaking, are the things that are older, and things are layered on top of each other, and everything belonging to man is near the surface of the earth. You don't find evidence of man down in where the younger creationists they explain the fossils by the flood, but they can't find the evidence of man with these animals. Somehow or another, man escaped that, according to the younger creationist view. And of course, I accept generally not necessarily the same time periods, but the same process, that the earth is much older than man. The heavens, the sun, moon, and planets and stars that Galileo said were going around the earth, but nobody now, none of us believe that. But the mainstream science, of course, teach these were somehow or another created as a process of the Big Bang expansion. Though there's a problem with that. How if everything is expanded at the same rate, how are you forming these galaxies? But there's also they teach the origin of the Earth by the nebular hypothesis, which the Earth was formed of meteorites, and therefore we have the middle of the Earth is made of the same material as in meteorites, which is iron and nickel in the center of the Earth. The older Hurons, of course, follows the same mainstream science. Younger creationists, they also, to their credit, they teach that the sun, moon, and stars were created on the 24th hour day. Now, the teachings on Genesis is exactly how this occurred. I'm not sure that the younger creationists all agree, and whatever they do teach, it's really hard for me to find from their literature. They're very brief about what they teach on that. But I teach that they were literally created on the fourth day. That God, a new miracle, the Big Bang or the expansion, could not have created there to be brought together, galaxies to be brought together. There had to be a different miracle, which the Bible speaks about on the fourth day. Now that makes this might explain the Earth. This does not include the Earth. The Earth is separately created, which I think explains why the Earth is the privileged planet that we see. It's different from everything else, and some of the new discoveries are seeing that our galaxy we're living in is as old as the universe itself. So they're pointing towards the view as other discovery. Now, the continents, according to mainstream science, are a result of plate tectonics. And the younger creationists, they have this hydroplate theory, which is really wow, but they explain that the continents were created after the flood. Everything was explained. I have a simpler explanation that it's more like the Bible, that the waters broke forth from the reservoirs inside the continents and created the flood. And then as a result of the flood, the oceans sink and spread. So I don't use plate tectonics, I use the flood. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, mainstream science teach this nebular hypothesis, and as far as I know, the younger creationists, they follow mainstream science in teaching that the Earth is made of iron and nickel. I'm following the Bible, and I'm teaching that it's water, but it's water in the plasma state, which under great temperatures and pressures, water is actually heavier than liquid metals or liquid rock. And so, in fact, I teach the same thing about the composition of the stars and planets, that everywhere in the universe, well, if we don't know what's inside the Earth, we don't know what's inside the stars and planets. And when we look at it with our telescopes and we see, well, what are we going to see on the surface? We're going to see, of course, we're going to see hydrogen, helium, the lightest things. And with our spectroscopes, we'll see that it appears that the heavens are made out of mostly hydrogen and helium, though they are starting to see more and more water in space as well as under the Earth. But I'm saying there's a good reason, and even the dark matter is probably water, and not necessarily in the plasma state, but inside the stars and the giant planets in a plasma state. The sun, moon, and planets, according to, again, standard science, is this nebular hypothesis. Younger creationists, they somehow or another, this was done on one day, 24-hour day. And I see this as part of the fourth divine day is when I'm literally following the Bible. I'm not being complicated. And I think it actually provides scientific answers that we have when we don't use the light of the Bible. Well, now it's in archaeology that my scripture science really shines. Mainstream science, it's actually the archaeology of mainstream science is not so much determined by what they discovered by finding the remains of ancient men, but they used living people and their theories of how living peoples live. They projected this back into the archaeology. So it's coming from anthropology. Hugh Ross, none of the creationist organizations, I'm the only one that's really in archaeology in a big way, but they don't have a lot to say about archaeology. But older creation sites are following the timeline of the mainstream archaeology. Therefore, they have man being several 100,000 years old. The younger creationist science, of course, they see. Now, this is really interesting. They don't see any. They have a hard time with what happened to the people that God killed. The earth was filled with violence, and the Lord had told the man to fill the earth, and yet they can find maybe they find some little piece of metal, looked like an artifact down in the coal seam, which could be explained other ways, but they have no evidence of the end of the world before the flood. Whereas I see the masses of evidence. I'm reinterpreting the prehistoric ruins, most of them, and showing that they could only be explained by the flood. And not only that, I traced the nations back to where they started, and it went right to the mountain where I actually visited what the remains of Noah's Ark, and the archaeology that I'm following is actually matching what we're seeing on this structure. So that's why I'm so confident that we've actually found Noah's Ark. Now, one of the ways that makes my scripture science so different from everything else, whether it's mainstream science or old earth creation science of my friend Hugh Ross, or the young earth creation science of my friend Ken Ham, they all believe in the Ice Age. When Norm Geisler and I went to visit Ken Ham when he first opened the Ark encounter, the first thing Norm said, it was when we met Ken, he said, "Ken, Philip and I believe the Ice Age was the flood." And my school is the only one I reject the Ice Age. The Ice Age is really taking the evidence of the flood and reinterpreting it as Ice Age. And I'm very confident about that there was never an Ice Age. And of course, the only way the younger creationists differ from a mainstream science is the era. They teach the Ice Age occurred after the flood. So if the flood is in 2345 or 49 BC, the Ice Age had to occur a few centuries after that. And that's when the dinosaurs that they brought on the Ark, they somehow disappeared during that period. Whereas it's very simple. Take this. If you look at this evidence given as the Ice Age, you see it not just in northern areas, but all over the world, and it's a result of the flood. As far as the date of the flood, of course, mainstream science regards it as a barred Bronze Age myth. They may say, some of them say, well, the floods, the Ice Age, melting of the ending of the Ice Age caused a lot of floods, and these flood stories, as a result of those, but they don't really teaching us the result of the flood, but basically it's essentially mythical according to mainstream science. Uh, Hugh Ross teaches a flood in the Persian Gulf, a local flood, I think around 80,000 years ago. And he, again, this is not a strong point of either the old or younger creationists. Uh, the date of the flood of the younger creationists is the same as the is mine in the Bible. It was about 2,349 years. That's Usher's date of the flood, but it'd be very close to that, even using radiocarbon dating. So this is a major differences in our teaching. Now, of course, as far as the world before the flood, mainstream science doesn't have a world before the flood because they don't have a flood. And old Earth creation science don't see any major changes as a result of the local flood. In fact, I don't think they teach that all the animals were the Earth. Well, they teach that a lot of Earth escaped the flood. Now, the younger creationists have a problem with the world before the flood because they're teaching that the continents and everything, that means the rivers, were formed after the flood. But you've got the Bible talking about rivers that we still know today before the flood, the Tigris, Euphrates rivers, rivers, the land of Cush, which Mesopotamia and later west coast of Africa, and the land of Havilah, one of these rivers, flowed through the land of Havilah, and they said they're created after the flood. But what created after the flood, just like the ones before the flood, actually they get to sounding a lot like Hugh Ross reinterpreting things. That's a big problem for the younger creationists. They're claiming a literal view of the Bible. And I said, not at all. They're not. I actually see before the flood no rain. Now this is a radical teaching, but the evidence is showing that the world at this time, you had rivers and the desert belts of the earth, and you had people living there. You had tropical elephants up in the North Pole. It was very different, and there was between these rivers and irrigation where people lived, and then you could have some grasslands on the continents where these animals could eat, but no rain before the flood. So you get the rainbow as a result of flood because it's now raining. And basically, I'm teaching the world before the flood and after the flood. Even though there was major changes, some of the places where people live are now off the coast of the oceans, but there was a change in the whole watering system of the earth, now caused by the seasons. But this is a major difference, and I'm saying the light of the Bible really puts a light on the science that everybody needs to know. Now, as far as the Genesis accounts, mainstream science, of course, see all this as allegory. Hugh Ross explains these ancient dates as due to missing genealogies. They said the father of also means the ancestor of, so he projects the dates back to the scientific dates for the origin of man by missing genealogies. Again, the younger creations I mentioned, they're describing creation from the point of view of a human on earth, whereas I'm saying it's the point of view of the creator who was doing that work on those days. Scientifically, here is where scripture science really shines. Mainstream science, there's not a lot of predictions they make. In fact, it just seems to get in fact, very few the same, of course, with Hugh, with old Earth creation science. Young Earth creation science, it's such a speculative theories that you hear that they can predict. If you can predict everything, you can predict nothing. So evolution predicts everything, therefore it can't predict anything. And but at the same time, if the flood predict can explain everything, it can predict nothing. But I have some very specific things, predictions that I can simplify science with because of being very specific about it integrates things. You remember I mentioned Occam, William of Occam, and one of William of Occam's teachings is that you should take the simplest explanation and not multiply causes. So it's called the simplicity test, which is recognized as one of the criteria of good science. But I just have to explain the current historical sciences, even the mainstream science, is fragmented. They don't fit together very much. Very muddled. You have to study and study to learn what is taught because there's no clear integrated view. Uh, with with Hugh Hugh Ross's additions, it seems to just get more muddled because you're using these scientific views and interpreting the Bible, but the explanation of the flood explanation of the young Earth creation is science. Well, they can do anything they want. When you hear some of the explanations, it's more like super magical. It's tremendously speculative. Whereas the using strictly the light of the scriptures and putting it on the science and not determining ahead of time what it teaches. See, younger Christian science says they said we don't need to look because we can tell from the Bible what it really teaches. And I'm saying you need to use this light before you can tell what the answers are. But it becomes integrated, elegant, and very powerful, which is the test, which means that we can make things that can be tested, and that's how you know that they're really scientific and not pseudoscientific. Now, the last thing I want to mention is I have a chart that I'll have that compares these different schools of science that'll be available to you. But this concludes my last part, and that is what a powerful instrument science, the scriptures are for understanding science. If we really use these and not confuse older scientific views with the views of the Bible, but really use the scripture and apply them to the latest scientific data. So that's the end of this fourth part of this history of Christianity and science. I hope you share this with your friends. Thank you.